I want to thank you all for being so accommodating. Senator Paul did such an exceptional job last night. I think his entire day has collapsed. And so we're working within a very, very tight time constraint, and I'm just wanting to thank each and every one of you for being so accommodating to work with us. We are delighted here in Spartanburg to have someone of Senator Paul's stature. And Senator, just so you know, this is the 8th leadership forum that we've done. And in this room today, we have notably individuals that have traveled farther than anywhere else in any of the other forums. We actually have a couple that's here from Germany that is a Rand Paul supporter. And we have, where is Peter and Agnes? If y'all can go ahead and stand up. And we also have folks from North Carolina. Someone was down from New Jersey. And so to do this at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon with working folks is a tremendous coup to you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Dr. Senator Rand Paul a great big Spartanburg welcome. So we're going to move real quickly. The ground rules are the same as that we've always had. We're going to dispense of the welcome and the introductions, and we're going to go straight to the order of the day. To make that work, I want to remind each of you that at the conclusion, and I'm going to stay on a tight timeline, at the conclusion, Senator Paul is going to run on out with his team, and we're going to go ahead and do some of the work that we do in the front end of everyone. Before I introduce Dr. Paul, I would like to say that Jan, who is seated right here, will be carrying these little signs. And the purpose is really just a banter, to get as many questions as we can answered. And it's really your forte, frankly. So it'll be a great opportunity to go back and forth. If we go over 3 minutes, she'll just stick up the sign saying we're beyond 3 minutes. And it's your call as to...
There's not a trap door.
No trap door. No, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Rand Paul, for introduction purposes, let me ask you this. How many of you watched the debate last night? All right. Now, how did Senator Paul do? Typically, we would do a series of introductions, and I'm only going to call out 4 names. We have 2 state senators that are here with us today, Senator Shane Martin and Senator Tom Davis. I'm not sure. They're seated right back here. Thank both of you. We also have 2 representatives, Eddie Talon and Eric Bedingfield. Where's Eric? Thank you both very much, all 4 of you, for coming. That's actually a large turnout for Spartanburg. So now for introduction, Senator Rand Paul, MD, is one of the nation's leading advocates for liberty. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010. He has proven to be an outspoken champion for constitutional liberties and fiscal responsibility. As a fierce advocate against government outreach, Senator Paul has fought tirelessly to return government to its limited constitutional scope. And so, Senator, this is typically the format. You can use whatever time you'd like to make comments, or you can go directly into the Q&A.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. I've just come from the Beacon, so if I look a little drowsy, I had a good meal over there. We have to figure out as a party and as conservatives how to win again. You may have noticed we didn't win the last 2 presidential elections. We're doing fine in South Carolina, so we have to think even beyond to some of the states we haven't won. There are 18 states that we haven't won in 30 years. Some of these are like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. They're the big old industrial states. They're also states that have big cities, inner city problems, much more diverse population. We just haven't been winning. So we have to decide how we're going to win again. Some people in our party say, well, we'll win again if we just dilute what we stand for. If we become Democrat light, then we can win again. I disagree. I think that's the wrong approach. In fact, I think we need to be more boldly for what we are for. And what does that mean? We are, or should be, the party of limited government, that the Constitution restrains the size of government. And what Patrick Henry said about this is that the Constitution wasn't intended to restrain the people, it was intended to restrain the government. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are our guide, but they're also our protection against government getting too big, too large, and taking away our freedoms. Now, many Republicans will tell you that, but many Republicans, I think, also let their guard down and have become so part of the system that government continues to grow. We've had Republican administrations where the debt doubled. New departments of government were added under the last Republican administration. In fact, I ran for office because I was unhappy with Republicans voting to bail out the banks, voting to double the size of the Department of Education, doubling the debt. I was unhappy because the conservatives, the Republicans I thought I was electing, didn't turn out to be so conservative. That's why I got involved. But to win again, I think we need to be more boldly for what we are for. That means smaller government, and it means lower taxes. Let's have a full-blooded argument or a full-throated argument with the Democrats about where are jobs best created. Are they best created by leaving the money in South Carolina or sending it to Washington? In Washington, though, most of the Republican leadership, the best that they think that we can hope for is revenue-neutral tax reform. What does that mean? Half of you pay more, half of you pay less, and the net result for the economy will be zero, and government remains the same size. They say, oh, we're going to simplify it. Well, if that's what we're for, I'm going back home. I've got better things to do than to be for just shifting the burden around a little bit, but not lessening the burden or not making government smaller. So I'm for dramatically lowering the taxes and still balancing the budget within 5 years by cutting spending significantly. I would have a flat tax. I'd get rid of the entire tax code, all 70,000 pages, and I'd replace it with one single rate, 14.5% for business, 14.5% for the individual. Right now, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. In the world. I mean, you wonder why American jobs are leaving? You wonder why American companies are going overseas? We're chasing them out of our country. I'm embarrassed to say that Canada has a tax rate half of ours. Let's cut out all the mess. Let's get rid of the IRS, the whole code, everything. Have one single rate. I think to win again, we need to be for the entire Bill of Rights. Everybody here is for the Second Amendment if you're a Republican. Republicans, we've gotten everybody that's for the Second Amendment. That's good. I'm for the Second Amendment. In fact, if you don't believe me, come into my house unannounced. So that's not really a problem among Republican candidates. All 55 people running for president will probably tell you the same thing. But there aren't that many who will stand up for the Fourth Amendment. I stood on the Senate floor for 10.5 hours to defend your right to be left alone. The president's collection of all of our phone records hasn't made us safer, but it's caused us to lose our privacy. The president's collection of all your phone records has been something that hasn't caught a terrorist. Not one terrorist has been caught. We had this debate last night with the, what's his name, the governor from New Jersey. All right, we had that debate with the governor last night because he seems to think we've got to do this to be safe. I think the opposite. I think if we collected more information on terrorists, but less indiscriminate information on everybody else, maybe we could sort through the information. There's a Nobel Prize winner by the name of Herbert Simon, and he said that more information doesn't equate to good decision making. Malcolm Gladwell puts it that way too. He says, good decision making isn't based on knowledge, it's based on understanding. We were warned about the Boston bomber. We were tipped off by the Russians. We did nothing. We interviewed him. He flew back to Chechnya and was radicalized. We didn't even know he was on the plane because he spelled his name one letter different than the computer program picked it up. Couldn't we maybe spend a little time fixing some of those problems? I'm the biggest advocate of privacy, but if I'm the judge and you call me and say, we've got information from the Russians that he might be a radical potential terrorist, I'm going to say yes to look at his records. But that's an individual's records. And if he called 100 people and you tell me their names and you say we have suspicion that 5 of them live in Pakistan, I'm also saying yes, look at their records. But what we have to decide as a country is, do we want them looking at all of our records all of the time? If I have your phone records, I can tell the majority of the time what your religion is. I can tell almost all the time who your doctor is and what your medical problems are. I can tell you your medications. If I have your credit card number, I can tell whether you drink, whether you smoke, and how much, whether you gamble, whether you read books. What books do you read? It's none of the government's business to be involved in our personal lives. So we need to be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment says you can't have your property taken away from you without due process or just compensation. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a trial by jury. This is slipping away from us in some of the fear and hysteria. And when I think about giving up our rights, I think about a young man in our neighborhood, not our neighborhood, in our neighboring town, who lost both legs and an arm fighting for us. And when I ask him what he fought for, he says he fought for the Constitution. He fought for the Bill of Rights. And to me, it would be sad if when he came home after such great sacrifice that we'd given up on all of our rights and said, oh, just take it, because in fear, we're going to give up on the Bill of Rights. So I am different than other Republicans. I'm different in the sense that I will be for the entire Bill of Rights. I'll take the message not just to the suburbs, but I'll take it to downtown Detroit. And so if you want somebody that can win again, I plan on taking this message, making it big enough, not diluting one iota of it, but making it a big enough and enticing enough message that we can win again as a party. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we're going to begin quickly with the panelists, beginning with Gordon Dill, who's an investigative reporter at WSBA, covered upstate politics for 15 plus years, anchors 7 on Your Side weeknights at 5:30. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Yeah.
You have the first question.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad you mentioned again, Senator, being a different kind of Republican, because all my questions are about that. First, you're running as a Republican. Your views are primarily libertarian. Is there a difference between a Republican and a libertarian, and if so, what is it?
You know, I would say I have a foot in both camps. One camp is conservative, one camp is libertarian. But I'm not the first. I mean, Ronald Reagan said that the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. Another way to describe it, and the way some authors have described it, is believing in freedom and tradition. Freedom is sort of the libertarian thing. Leave me alone, let me do what I want. But tradition is the concept that we have a religious and a moral backbone to our country. Some people have described it as liberty and virtue. Os Guinness is a theologian, and he says you really can't have one without the other. That liberty without virtue or liberty without restraint can lead to something that's run amok that really has no stability or no civilizing force. So I think it's a little bit of both, and I really consider myself to be someone who fuses both libertarian and conservative ideas. But I think they're all consistent with being a Republican. The Republican Party traditionally was the party of limited government, small government in the Constitution. So I don't find any inconsistency. I think it actually is something that is the Republican tradition.
Thank you. Next is Dolph Bell, who's been a newspaper reporter or editor for nearly 30 years. He's been with the Greenville News since 1999. Originally from Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, he worked in Virginia newspapers before a master's degree in public affairs. Dolph, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here in time for my first question. That was a good opening question, Gordon, because I think mine kind of dovetails with that and brings that dichotomy home to the policy level. You want to wear the title of libertarian as well as a Reagan conservative, but the two are not identical. One area where they part ways regards the proper use of American military power abroad. Ronald Reagan signaled where he stood on the question while campaigning against Jimmy Carter in 1980. Just 5 years after the fall of Saigon, with the Vietnam experience still raw in the electorate's mind, Reagan made the politically risky declaration that the U.S. intervention in Southeast Asia was, quote, a noble cause. Do you agree with that? And if you do, would you distinguish Vietnam from subsequent U.S. interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan and the possibility of another intervention to stop the Islamic State terrorist group?
I'm a Reagan conservative. I believe in peace through strength. My first experience going to a national convention was actually in 1976 when my family supported Reagan over Ford. So we've been Reagan conservatives since the very beginning. Reagan did believe in peace through strength. He believed in a strong national defense. He believed, as I do, that it's the preeminent function and the preeminent responsibility of government to have a strong national defense. But Reagan is probably not as simple as some people make him out to be. I don't think it's simple or can be simply concluded that Reagan believed that intervention was always the answer or that every war was always the answer. In fact, there's something called the Weinberger Doctrine, which was written under Reagan, and actually K.T. McFarland, who's on Fox News, was part of the author of this doctrine. This doctrine kind of evolved into the Powell Doctrine that people talk about, but the doctrine was basically that war should be the last resort, not the first resort. Reagan was a big opponent and very much someone who wanted to try to do everything to prevent nuclear war. Reagan did negotiate with the Soviets. So sometimes you'll hear people in our party who are like, oh, you're terrible if you want to consider negotiations. Well, that would include Reagan in it then too, because Reagan did want to negotiate. Now, Reagan negotiated, though, from a position of strength. So I would say where it differs from what's going on now is I don't think President Obama has sufficiently negotiated from a position of strength. So I oppose the deal that the president has put forward with Iran. But I don't oppose negotiations, and there are some in our party who say, oh, we should never negotiate. With regard to all the different wars from Vietnam on, one of the things that I think should be seen when we look back in history is that when we go to war, we should go to war as the Constitution also prescribes. The Constitution divided that power and didn't give all the power to the president. In fact, it says very specifically that the initiation of war comes from the Congress and from the people, but that there has to be a vote of Congress. And so I'm a stickler that that's the way war should begin, and that should unite the people. And when a president thinks that we need to go to war, they come before a joint session of Congress and present the evidence, and then Congress votes on this. As much as I think the Iraq war was a mistake, at least George Bush did come before Congress and ask for a vote. Under this president, who mercilessly went after George Bush for the Iraq war, this president has now involved us in 2 wars with no vote. He's refused to come before Congress for a vote. Hillary, Obama war in Libya, and now the war with ISIS. The war in Libya, I think, was a huge disaster and a mistake. You toppled a secular strongman. What did you get? You get chaos and the rise of radical Islam. Now a third of Libya actually pledges allegiance to ISIS. So I think if you look objectively at the Libyan war, it was a mistake. I'm the only one in the party that basically was saying so in Washington. Almost everyone who snips at my heels and says they don't like my foreign policy, they wanted boots on the ground in Libya. There are some people who want boots on the ground in 30 different countries now. I'm the one who says, you know, we need to think before we act. We need to think before we jump into another war, whether it's good or bad for us. With regard to ISIS, the main point I made last night, and I'll make again, is that if you want to defeat ISIS, the first thing we got to do is quit arming them. ISIS rides around in $1 billion worth of our Humvees. They do suicide attacks against us and our allies in our own Humvees. They pay their soldiers with $1 billion worth of cash that we left behind. They have anti-tank weapons that we gave to allies of ISIS and then got snatched up by ISIS. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United States gave over 600 million or over 600 tons of weapons into this war. And our own ambassador admitted that we would be giving weapons to the allies of Al-Qaeda. That's foolishness. I mean, for goodness sakes, we need to think through what we do. But none of it means that I don't believe in a strong defense, a defense strong enough to defend us and deter all attack. It just means that I'm not so anxious to get involved in every war. The Shiites and the Sunnis have been killing each other for 1,000 years over there. They'll kill each other for another 1,000. We're not going to make them into a Western-style democracy. We're not going to make them like us. We're not going to make them Christians. These are a people that have been killing each other for 1,000 years. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't defend ourselves. It doesn't mean we shouldn't protect our allies as well as our soldiers as well as our embassies. But if it comes to, do you want troops back in the Middle East? I'm for boots on the ground. They need to be Arab boots on the ground. If they're not willing to fight, then I'm not willing to send any more of our troops back over there.
Thank you. Beth. Today is Beth Brotherton's last day with WYFF News 4 after 15 years, and we watched a very emotional goodbye. And so I've got to tell you.
Please don't make me cry again. I don't need to cry in front of the
Thank you for
presidential
taking the
candidate.
time today and joining us. Most of you know Beth grew up in Zambia, child of missionaries, and delighted to have your question, Beth.
Yes, no pressure. Gordon just teased me. This might be my last act as a journalist in a while. So here we go. I don't like it when people ask me two-part questions, but I'm going to ask you one. Last night, 24 million people watched the debate. Do you think they watched it to see what ridiculous thing Donald Trump would say, or did they watch it to see what the rest of you were going to say? And I guess the second part of that question would be, last night was also Jon Stewart's final night on The Daily Show. The last time the president was on that program, they were talking about Donald Trump. And they said something along the lines as Republicans love having Trump in this because he makes the rest of them look, quote, less crazy. I guess so my question is, first of all, did people watch last night for Trump? Second of all, is there a benefit right now in his kind of, I don't want to call all of his statements outlandish, but what some would call outlandish statements, making the rest of you look more serious, less crazy?
I think people do watch television for entertainment, and I think there's a possibility some people did tune in for entertainment. But there's a lot of people who are serious, who are taking times off from their life to come out here to hear about ideas, and most of them watch the debate as well. So I think it's a combination of people who are serious about determining who will be the next commander-in-chief, the next leader of the free world. And then there are some who may be watched for entertainment value. I think ultimately, I have a great deal of respect for the American people. I have a great deal of respect for the jury system, that juries can figure out truth. Maybe not always, but it's better than the opposite where we don't have people involved. And so I think the American people will sort through, and we will find somebody who is fitting to be commander-in-chief. To my mind, what we are trying to decide is who has the wisdom and the solemnity to actually be in charge of our nuclear weapons. And I think the compilation of statements by people that don't seem serious will ultimately preclude them from being considered.
Thank you. Next, we have Aaron Adelson. Aaron is an Emmy-winning reporter for WLOS, WYMA. Prior to coming to North Carolina, Senator, you'll get a kick out of this. He worked in Lexington, Kentucky, and he covered a number of political races. Aaron's a Philadelphian native and graduate of Syracuse University. Aaron.
Thank you for having me. I'll just start with, I wonder what advice you've gotten about running for president from your dad.
We
Right.
talk about it, and he did warn me, he said, be very careful because you might win. My dad was involved in politics for 20 or 30 years, and I think a great deal of people respect him from both sides of the aisle because he was honest, he was forthright, and never pulled any punches. And so I think those are the type of lessons that I've learned from watching him, is to stand your ground, state what you believe in, and try to present it to the audience the best you can.
Thank you. Next, we have Michael Smith, executive editor of the Spartanburg Herald-Journal, whose publisher, Larry Riley, is here, and we always appreciate his attendance. He is over the newsroom, administration, and opinion, recently awarded the Gatehouse Media Editorial Writer of the Year, and we're really pleased to have Mike here. Mike, your question.
Thank you. Last night you criticized the mayor of Houston over subpoenaing ministers' sermons as part of the litigation over the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. You said, when the government tries to invade the church to enforce its own opinion on marriage, that's when it's time to resist. What do you mean by resist, and what kind of resistance would you urge the American people to?
When I first heard of the controversy down there, the first sort of image that came to my mind was of Martin Luther. And when Martin Luther decided to resist, he went and he nailed to the church door in Wittenberg, he nailed his protests. There are all types of ways to resist, refusing to turn in your sermons. I think that there is a bright line between religion and government, and that the government has no business getting involved in religion, and that the First Amendment, begins, the government shall not do this. It's that Congress shall pass no law. And it's very important that I think we keep that distinction and keep that separation. The separation between the two, the problem can come is that, and this even conservatives can fall into this trap, the rationale from progressives about why they can regulate the church, and this is coming, and it's been coming for a long time, is that they believe that if I give money to my church and it's tax deductible, that's the government's money I've given to the church. And so that's why progressives all the time, and you need to be very aware of what words mean or don't mean, they say that your deduction when you give to your church is a subsidy, and that government is subsidizing the church, therefore they can regulate the church. Well, this is an absurd notion and should be resisted, but be very careful. Be very careful. This is the next step that will come, is they will say your contributions are the government's money, not yours, and that they can now regulate the church. But there can be all kinds of variety of opinions over what the law can be, but there are some steadfast things that we should not let them cross, and that is invading the church and telling the church that they can't decide what is right and wrong, what marriage is or what marriage isn't. And it's a time to resist. It's a time, if I had been one of those ministers, I would not have submitted my sermons. And be what may, there would have been repercussions, but that's what I mean by resistance.
Thank you. We'll go now to Dolph. We're going to the second one, and we'll run since Gordon started. Your next question, sir.
It's more than 6 months until the South Carolina primary, and I'm already getting a little tired of politics. I'm thinking maybe you are too. So how about if we change the subject and get you to talk about your charitable work south of the border, doing surgeries, and what motivates you to do that? How'd you get involved? And does that tell us anything about what kind of a president Rand Paul would be?
I'm an eye surgeon. I did my medical training actually in North Carolina. I spent 7 years in Durham and practiced for 20 years in Bowling Green, Kentucky. During that time, I became friends with a neurosurgeon who's from Guatemala originally. And for years, he would bring up kids from Guatemala that I would operate on. And some adults, but primarily kids. Kids don't often get cataracts, but a couple of brothers had cataracts, and they were 12 and 14 years old, and he brought them up. So we did surgery on them. This is probably 15 years ago now. So last year, I actually got to go to Guatemala with a group that we went with the University of Utah, and we did about 200 cataract surgeries. But it was interesting because I got to see these two boys that I had operated on 15 years ago. And we also saw a little girl whose eyes that I had straightened. And it was a wonderful experience. I mean, it's, there's nothing like that in politics. I can tell you that no reward like that in politics ever. And one thing about medicine is you get a pretty much, particularly in ophthalmology, an immediate kind of sense of reward that people get better because they see better almost immediately. And most of the people down there, here, if you get cataracts, if it gets a little blurry, you're having a little trouble reading, you often just go ahead and have your surgery. Down there, they're blind. They're led in or carried in because they're completely blind from cataracts. Because there's not as many people to do surgery, there's nobody wears sunglasses, and the altitude's high, and the air's there's just more UV exposure to UV light. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm going back again. We're going back next week to Haiti, and we'll spend a week in Haiti doing surgery down there. But to me, there's nothing more rewarding than doing that.
Thank you, Dolph. Great question. Beth.
Well, while we're talking about medicine, let's talk about healthcare. I'm allergic to bees. I got stung a couple months ago, went to the ER, got some epinephrine, got my bill last night. My insurance covered nothing, $1,600 for a wasp sting in my backyard. I think everybody, including the president, was hopeful that we were going to solve this. What can we still do? What haven't we done? How can we make this manageable?
Well, I knew you and I were going to have something in common. I'm allergic to bees also.
Yeah.
All right?
Then why is it we get stung more often than anyone? I've been stung 3 times in a year. Do they know? Do they know?
The problem is, as a physician for 20 years, patients would come into me, and their number one complaint was the expense. whether they owned a business or they worked somewhere, their number one complaint was the expense of insurance. It wasn't access. We did have some access problem, but for the most part, we did have access. We had Medicaid for the poor. We also had the emergency room. None of it perfect, but we did have access. Almost everybody in our country could get in to see a doctor. But we really had a problem with expense. So what did we do? The president did everything to fix access, and he made access even easier, but he made access easier by giving people subsidized insurance and expanding Medicaid. In the process of doing so, though, he did nothing about expense. In fact, maybe he exacerbated the expense problem because there's fewer of us buying insurance now, so what's left buying is paying more. He also made it illegal, and this is an important concept that you don't hear enough. It is illegal in America to buy inexpensive insurance. Tell your friends this. That's what Obamacare did. It's illegal to buy inexpensive insurance. Why? Because every insurance product has to cover certain items. So some of the free insurance he's giving away or subsidized has a $6,000 deductible, but it then costs an enormous amount. The trade-off used to be if we went to higher deductible, you got cheaper premium. Now you got high deductible and expensive premium because you can't buy insurance that doesn't have birth control or doesn't have pregnancy or doesn't have pediatric dental coverage. All of these mandates, none of it's free. Insurance companies know this. Insurance companies love this stuff. They've mandated everybody have it. Taxpayers got to buy it for everybody, and it's still extraordinarily expensive. I had insurance for 10 years for my family of 5, and I had a true $5,000 deductible. That didn't cover anything, and I spent between $3,000 and $5,000 a year for my whole family for years. Under Obamacare, I have something a little bit similar. I can't quite get the same thing. It still covers a million things. I'm 20-something thousand. My 21-year-old has pediatric dental coverage, and I say, does it cover him? No, it covers his kids. I don't want him to have kids. So, but the bottom line is, this is an economic question. People think, oh, you're a doctor, you'll have special insight. You need someone who understands capitalism, understands the marketplace, and understands how capitalism creates enormous wealth, distributes the most amount of goods at the cheapest amount of cost. So you want capitalism in healthcare. We didn't have enough capitalism, we went the wrong way.
Aaron.
Sure. As Karen mentioned, I was still in Kentucky on Election Day. Mitch McConnell said, I don't know why anyone would want to be president. You're traveling a lot, probably not sleeping very much. I imagine you're not seeing your family as much as you'd like. So on a personal level, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be president?
I think my concern is that we've continued to do the same old thing, Republican or Democrat side. And whoever we get, government gets bigger and the debt gets bigger. And I don't think unless we get something different, it's ever going to change. And what I mean by different is most Democrats would come in here and say, I'm going to protect all your social welfare programs and I'm going to expand them. And I'm going to cut the military. And most conservatives will come in here and say, I'm going to cut all the domestic programs or hold the line, I'm going to expand the military. Bottom line is, it's all out of control. It's way out of control. I believe in as strong a defense as anybody, but you can't have a blank check for the military either. We have to hold the line. We are not projecting power or strength. We are not, building this great national defense by borrowing money from China to put it into our defense. You need to pay for your defense out of the wealth of your nation, out of the surplus of your nation. But you can't get stronger by going further in debt. And I don't think there's a Republican that will tell you that. I don't think there's a Democrat that will tell you that. And I think somehow we've got to hold the line as far as expenditures, believe that government should be smaller, the marketplace bigger, return the power and the money and everything else to the people, and shrink up the federal government. But the inertia and the status quo is so great, you're never, ever going to do it unless you get a real activist who says, we cannot live this way, and we can't go on this way. And if we do, the repercussions could well be that we destroy our country and our currency. And I promise you that's a lot worse than anything you can imagine if that happens.
Thank you. Mike.
Senator, you've gotten a maximum amount of contributions from the Marijuana Policy Project. What is your policy on the legalization of marijuana?
I think that the federal government should, for the most part, stay out of the way of the states. And the states should make these decisions. I've not been an advocate for legalization, but I have been an advocate for decriminalization. And people say, well, what's the difference? I think we've made a huge mistake putting people in jail for 5, 10, 15, 20, sometimes for life for marijuana. I think it clogs up our prisons, and that our prisons are such that you can't keep the violent criminals. We have federal judges releasing the violent criminals because we don't have room for them because we're putting people for pot in prison. I think people can make decisions, and I'm not an advocate for marijuana, I'm not an advocate for alcohol, I'm not an advocate for pills or any of the other things that people might use. But I am an advocate for freedom. I also think that there are potential medical uses for marijuana as well. There are kids that have 100 seizures a day. If you have 100 seizures a day, your brain is stunted and will not grow. And they will grow up with small brains and not be able to speak. Is marijuana going to cure them? I don't know. But some of these people are on 7 and 8 different traditional medicines and still having seizures. The big drug warriors, including the guy from New Jersey, would put the parents in jail if they give them cannabis oil. They will send the federal troops into South Carolina. I don't even know if y'all have medical marijuana or not. You probably don't have medical marijuana, do you?
A little bit.
A little bit. But, you know, imagine what it is. If your child has 100 seizures a day and you want to give them cannabis oil, are you going to send social services like to take the parents away? Are you going to put them in jail? Are we going to prevent the people who dispense medical marijuana from having bank accounts and filing tax returns? In Colorado, they're doing a big experiment. They have both legalization and they have medical marijuana. Their crime rate's gone down. They brought in $53 million in new taxes into Colorado. Does it mean there's no drug problems? No, there probably were drug problems before and there'll be drug problems afterwards. But part of the people who do advocate and say, well, gosh, maybe we should legalize it, it's like, does anybody remember what happened when we legalized alcohol? You got rid of gangs, you got rid of violence, and what you had is you now have legalized distribution of alcohol. We still have problems. I mean, drunk driving and deaths on the road probably are 1,000-fold worse than marijuana as far as numbers of deaths. So I don't know. I'm open to letting states make the decision. I wouldn't come and tell South Carolina what to do, but if South Carolina decided to do something, I wouldn't have the federal government coming in here and telling you can't do it.
Okay, now we are slap out of time, so we're going to do something we've never done before. And Senator, you're going to get out faster if you answer faster. So this is the question. We're doing a fast round.
I'm not sure that's an incentive or not.
So Beth.
You've heard of filibuster,
I
right?
have. You're the filibuster man. Listen, I got it. Beth, we're going to start. No, we're with Beth right now, right? First one up.
Let me get a second question in there if I can.
Unless Gordon's
Karen.
really hard, we should let him have one
It's not
more.
that hard.
It's got to be fast, but let me tell you after that, we're going to play by this. And Beth, we're going to bounce to you, and we're going to do fast 1, 1, 1. You get 1 minute to answer.
Okay.
And the faster you answer, the faster we're out. So Gordon,
Okay. Well,
help me out now.
I'm going to go fast. We mentioned campaign donations. No matter how different a candidate you are, you're going to have to raise boatloads of money if you want to be president of the United States. Recently, 3 people associated with raising money for your campaign were indicted for trying to pay for the support of an official in Iowa, a state senator, to support your father in 2012. They've already raised $3 million for your campaign, the same folks. In what way can you assure the people here that corrosive influence from these fundraisers won't influence you the same way it does every other candidate?
First of all, they don't raise money for my campaign. They're not connected to me at all. I don't employ them. No connection at all.
They're with a super PAC that
Yes.
gives money to your campaign.
And by law, they're completely separate. I can't hire them or fire them, but they have stepped down from their position. But they also, I think, should be given the presumption of innocence until they're proven guilty. They've been accused of something. Campaign finance law is very, very complicated. We've got dozens of lawyers and accountants trying to keep us from having any kind of infraction. One of the problems I think we've done in our country is we scare good people from participating in anything anymore because we say, if you make a mistake or if you don't file the proper form, we will put you in jail. I think most things that, like not filling out the forms correctly, ought to be civil penalties, and that's the way historically it was done. This prosecution will be by the Obama administration. It was released the day before my campaign, my presidential debate. They've been sitting on this stuff for 4 years. Think about it if it were you and you worked in a campaign, you may or may not have filled out the paperwork correctly, But you got to wait year in, year out with them just sort of holding this over your head, and then they release it the day before my debate. I find it suspicious, that there could be politics involved. I don't know. I don't know the facts of any of it, but it doesn't have anything to do with my campaign, and it did come from another election 4 years ago. And we'll deal with that, but it's not really directly, I think, reflective of our campaign or anything that anybody in my campaign has done.
Gordon, thank you. All right, Beth, here we go. Fast question, 1 minute to answer. We're going to get through the panel, and then we're going to release the senator. His folks are awfully antsy back there. I've made a commitment, and I'm going to follow through with it, and then we're going to wrap up. Beth.
Okay, since I got to go fast, I'm going to go goofy. I can't believe I'm doing this. I've done 8 of these. Y'all, every single one of you has worn cowboy boots. Is it because they're comfortable? Is it because it makes you feel like you look like a normal person? Or do you always wear cowboy boots? Why have all 8 of the presidential candidates who have come
Carly
here
didn't
cowboy
wear
boots?
cowboy boots.
That's
Miss Fiorina.
true. Carly Fiorina had on blue high heels. My
There you go.
apologies. Thank you. So 7 of the 8.
Well, my blue high heels were in the shop. I grew up in Texas, and I grew up wearing boots, and just one of those things.
Okay.
That was
Aaron,
quick.
great,
That was
great,
quick.
very quick. I'm loving this. Aaron.
Last night, Senator Rubio said Hillary had the best resume of all the candidates. When you look at hers, what do you see?
1 minute, Senator.
I think that her decision-making over Benghazi should preclude her from ever being considered for the presidency. And it's not just her dissembling, which is a nice way of saying she wasn't telling the truth about the video or any of that stuff. It's the 9 months that led up to Benghazi where they pleaded for help. They pleaded for more security. They begged for more security. And when I asked her about it in committee, I said, did you read the cables from Ambassador Stevens? And she acted like put off that she didn't have enough time to do this. Now, some give her great credit because she traveled everywhere. That's when they talk about her resume. Traveling doesn't equate to, good decision making. It means she's got a lot of frequent flyer miles. It didn't make her any more wise. And I really do believe that. And I think it is a mistake to think Benghazi is a political question. You want a commander-in-chief who actually will defend our embassies, will defend our troops, will defend our soldiers.
Mike.
A group headed by former UN Ambassador John Bolton is running an ad criticizing you for something you said in 2007, that our national security is not threatened by Iran having one nuclear weapon. What did you mean then, and what is your current assessment of the threat Iran poses?
I think over time Iran has become more of a nuclear threat. Back in 2007, I think they had maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 centrifuges. They now have 20,000 centrifuges. So I think facts do change over time, and I think it'd be hard for anybody to argue that they're not more of a potential nuclear threat now than they were then. I've voted for sanctions since I was elected repeatedly to try to bring them to the negotiating table. I do think that negotiations are preferable to war. I would continue to negotiate. I don't think that the deal that the president came up with is an adequate one. And I would have held out for a deal that did not release the sanctions except for very gradually and as we saw consistent evidence of compliance over a several-year period.
All right, we're going to skip you, Gordon, since you got to jump in. Sorry, we're going to end up with Dolph. Last in, first out. There you go.
Great. Let's see if we can get this done quickly. I'm not sure. It's a complicated matter. Entitlement reform. I thought one of the more interesting exchanges in the debate last night was between Governor Huckabee and Governor Christie on that issue. As you know, Huckabee is arguing that it is not fair to the recipients to cut back benefits because they had no choice in being involved in Social Security, and they were not the ones that mismanaged the program to the brink of insolvency. His solution, and he admits it's only part of the solution, would be a fair tax. Christie is among many Republicans who would cut back benefits, and one of the ways he'd do that is to raise the retirement age. Is there something that Rand Paul would do besides cutting benefits to deal with the entitlement reform issue?
The first thing you have to do is understand the enormity of the problem. Social Security is $6 trillion short. Medicare is $35 to $40 trillion short. Then you have to understand how we got here. We made the promises a long time ago when there was about 16 workers for one retiree. Now there's a little bit less than 3 workers for one retiree. Families got smaller. The other thing that happened is we began living longer. Social Security was great at the beginning. It was free. Everybody died at 65. Now the average age is 80, and so there's a lot more expense. I tell people it's not Republicans' fault, it's not Democrats' fault, it's your grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. And they're all retiring now. And so it's just a demographic shift. One generation can't bind another generation forever. It's sort of a fraud to say, it's like anything else. Detroit went from 1 million people to 500,000 people. You can't just promise pensions on 1 million and do it if there's not 1 million people there. Same with a company. A company that has 1,000 employees can't promise a pension that won't work when they have 500. So you just can't make those promises. You will have to raise the age. We've already done it once. In 1983, we raised the age from 65 to 67. It's going to have to go to 70. It just has to. It's either that or you bankrupt the whole system, destroy our country, the currency, everything, just by printing up more money and borrowing. If you want to make Social Security solvent, it has to go to 70. Same with Medicare. Now, you don't do it immediately. You don't change somebody who's at 67 to 70. You change people my age 3 months a year or something. And you just keep doing it year after year after year. You probably actually even need to index the age to longevity. And I've somewhat tongue-in-cheek said, if you live to be 120, you're going to get your Social Security when you're 115. But it would have to change over time as technology changes and we live longer. That doesn't fix everything. With Social Security, it fixes 2/3 of the problem by raising the age to 70. The remaining third you could fix through means testing. And what does that mean? A lot of us who did pretty well would have to get a little bit less. It's not that bad, really. If you made over $100,000 a year, you get $2,200 a month in Social Security. If you go to $1,900 a month for everybody that made more than $100,000, and everybody loses a little bit, but primarily it's those right at the top, you can fix the remaining third for Social Security. For Medicare, though, you do all of this, and you still only fix about 1/3 to 1/2 of the problem. Medicare is so hugely out of whack, it's almost not fixable. However, you can fix Medicare also if you bring in some competitive things into the marketplace and try to drive prices down, but it's going to be hard. With Social Security and with all of these things, with Medicare, it's important to remember the problem. You pay less in taxes than you take out. With Medicare, you pay, over your working lifetime, the average taxpayer will pay $100,000 in Medicare taxes, but the average taxpayer will take out $350,000. Multiply that by 60 million and you get about a $30 trillion debt. So something has to happen. It won't be easy, won't be simple. The only thing that would be nice to add to that, since austerity isn't a great sell, would be to maybe let young people just opt out completely and have their own accounts.
All right, it has been great fun. I want you all to give our senator a great big Spartanburg thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Oh, he's great. He's great. We'll be on Hannity tonight, if anybody wants to watch. We'll be on Hannity with Chris Wallace tonight.
O'Reilly tonight. All right, everyone stay put for just a second. I've made a pledge. They're going to go ahead and slip on out. If y'all can just get seated, I'm going to do a couple of things. The reason we're doing Palladian View is to bring candidates here to give you all information, but more importantly, our hope and wish is that you all will engage. I'm so proud of you guys driving in from North Carolina and making an effort. And frankly, I wish it would happen all over the United States, and particularly here in South Carolina, that you'll find a candidate, engage, get behind, and really become passionate in this whole venue of politics. This is the greatest panel, and Beth, we're going to keep you on because I believe you've added such a dimension. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a great big thank you. And then our local party, I've got to thank Bill Conley for kind of pushing this one through, and I know that you guys work awfully hard to make that happen. The sponsor today, where is our sponsor? I saw him earlier. Has he slipped out? I wanted to thank Bill, and then Alexa Newman. Where's Lex? Lexa, thank you for always being there. And last but certainly not least, the co-founder of Palladian View, Betty Poe, who came on in here. Betty, thank you. Stand on up. I want everyone to thank this lady. Yes, you are. All right, we're going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all so very much for coming until the next one.